So it turns out these little holes here are actually kind of important. And as I looked into it, I realized there's a bunch of little things like this on the guitar that I've completely overlooked my entire life that are actually fairly valuable to know. If your tuning machines get stiff or squeaky, these little holes here can be used to apply lubricant. Well, you can get specialized stuff for this. I asked my luthier buddy and he told me a little bit of Vaseline and a toothpick, and that's all you need to get the job done. And she's lubed up and ready to twist. Do you ever wonder why in Stratocasters and Telecasters you have some pickups that are straight and one that's angled? And the reason is to balance the tone that you get from the bridge pickup. See, the tone of a string is brighter closer to the bridge than when it's further away. With this angle, the tone of the higher strings is accentuated because you gain those higher characteristics being closer to the bridge, whereas the lower strings are being accentuated because you're getting a more bassier character being further away from the bridge, giving us, all in all, a more balanced sound. Now, every now and then you do find guitars where all the pickups are angled, but the further you get away from the bridge, the less pronounced the difference is, so it's not really necessary for the other pickups. If you play a Gibson or Epiphone style guitar, you might notice that you have some tuning issues on the D and specifically the G string. Why is that, and how do you fix it? The answer lies in the way that these strings angle after they come across the nut. See how there's little to no angle here? Whereas this one definitely does. When you're bending your strings or tuning it, it's not sliding freely over top. There's a place where it can get stuck or unstuck on. This creates tuning instability. Of course, there are ways to get around this. There's attachments you can buy that spread the strings out nicer. You can file your nut so that it angles towards the tuning machine. The easiest, most least intrusive thing that I do is use Big Ben's nut sauce. This stuff is a lubricant that you put in your nut, and it minimizes the friction. Now be honest, have you got much better at guitar in the last year? See, I've heard so many people tell me that they're spinning their wheels, noodling around, playing the same old stuff, never getting anywhere. If this sounds all too familiar, I made the Samurai Guitar Dojo with you in mind. This is a lesson program where every week we look at a single topic, I teach it to you, and show you how to use it creatively. And if you got 15 to 30 minutes to practice a few times a week, you're gonna start stacking up the new skills real quick. See, with this, I've tried to remove the question, what do I work on? This is a clear-cut path to improving from the intermediate stage that so many people get stuck at to advanced. There's a number of lessons already up, and when you sign up, you gain access to everything. We got a launch promo that's almost done. Use the link in the description. You're gonna get in for $7.50 a month. I'd love to see you there. Anyways, let's get back to it. I'm embarrassed to admit, but for the longest time, I actually didn't really know how an acoustic guitar works. Let me explain. You pluck your strings, and that energy is transferred through the bridge into the top or the soundboard. The sound waves are amplified as they bounce around inside the body and are projected out the sound hole. And beyond just being interesting information, there's actually some practical implications here. If you're in any way restricting the ability of your guitar to resonate, it changes the sound. Bluegrass players, for example, will typically use a closed hand floating picking style because if you're resting your hand on the guitar, it won't ring out as much. Or if you're in the studio recording guitar, it's going to sound different if you're squeezing it against your body than if you're resting it gently. Let me show you what I mean. So a number of Telecaster issues can actually be solved with this thing here. See, when Leo Fender first conceptualized guitars like these, the ashtray cover was actually an integral part of the design. And if you look at this and try to ignore your preconceived notions of what a Telecaster is, this is a lot slicker than this. See, beyond hiding what Leo Fender considered unsightly hardware, it actually has some practical uses. It protects your palm from these pointy screws down here. It offers a protection for the uncovered pickup, and it actually provides a little bit of shielding to keep the noise out. Now, the problem was, soon after this was invented, this kind of sound starts getting popular. You can't get that palm muting sound with one of these. It limits your playability, and that ultimately trumps any of its benefits. Fender nailed a lot of things right out of the gates. This was not one of them, and guitar players ended up using them for ashtrays or something to put their picks in. You know how your guitar sounds the best when it's really loud? Well, there's actually some science behind this, and understanding it can help you craft your best tone. See, humans don't perceive all the frequencies in the spectrum of what we can hear evenly. And evolutionarily speaking, it makes sense for our ear to be able to hear the frequencies where the human voice are better than, say, I don't know, the low frequencies of like a whale call. If you visualize this on an EQ pedal, right around here is what we hear the best. And so when you're setting your EQ pedal, you might make it so that you're boosting some of those frequencies that we don't hear quite as well to give us what we would perceive as a more balanced guitar sound. Or contrarily, maybe you're boosting the frequencies that our ear hears well so that your guitar really stands out. Something like that. Now here's the crazy thing. We actually perceive the spectrum of sound differently at different volumes. So when everything is turned down, we actually perceive the bass side of things quieter than it actually is. And when you turn everything up, everything sounds more even. So when you're trying to find the perfect EQ for your sound, you're going to want to test it at both high and quiet volumes. As well, you might think differently about how you're setting that pedal depending on how loud you're planning on playing. So this next tip I've mentioned before, but it's kind of a game changer, and it took me way too long to figure this out, so I'll keep spreading the good word. But you know how some trem bars are perfectly firm, they stay exactly where you want them to, whereas others are wibbly and sad or overly stiff? I always thought that some guitars had just figured it out, and others you just kind of had to deal with this. But I was wrong. See, Fender sells these tiny little springs. You plop them down the hole, screw the bar in, and suddenly you're as firm and steady as you need to be. A lot of us, myself included, until a couple days ago, don't know what these little things here are for, but they're called string trees, and the purpose is twofold. First of all, by creating that downward tension on the string, it makes it less likely for the string to pop out of the nut slot. As well, by elongating that string and making it tighter, it gives the string more sustain. The first thing we're taught when we learn guitar is how to tune it. E, A, D, G, B, E. But I bet you don't know why this is the standard. So for centuries, the musical spacing between strings on an instrument was pretty much always perfect fifths. My mandolin, for example, goes from a G to a D, D to an A to an E. The spacing between each one of those strings, perfect fifth. Violin, cello, all that stuff follows this kind of pattern. But guitar, perfect fourth, perfect fourth, perfect fourth, major third, perfect fourth. What's up with that? We see this shift begin in the 1500s with a new instrument called the guitarra battente. The tuning of this instrument was the same as the guitar minus a low E string, and the reason for this tuning was because of the roll, the size of the instrument, the comfort, just really the convenience. With the small size of a violin or the way that a cello sits, you're able to get your hands in different positions than with a guitar that sits on your lap. And with this larger instrument that you're going to be playing chords as well as melodies on, everything just fits easier under the fingers when you base the tuning on perfect fourths. But if instead of having perfect fourths between every string, if you tweak it just a little bit between the G and the B, having that major third there, you make it so that everything fits a little bit nicer under the fingers, it's a little bit more harmonious, and the lowest and highest string are the same note. So pretty much through years of trial and error, they figured out what works best for the instrument. But why isn't everything lower or higher in pitch? As far as I can tell, no one really knows. Some say the tension of standard tuning worked best for the gut strings that were used at the time. Others believe it's because other instruments kind of related to this tuning. And some say this tuning just worked the best with the human voice. All right, here's a fun one to wrap things up. If you own a Fender, there's a decent chance your guitar ends in the word caster. Have you ever wondered why that is? Back in the 50s, the second electric guitar that Fender produced was called the Broadcaster. See, back then, the TV was new, it was all the rage, and terms associated with it were used everywhere. Broadcast being an example of this. However, the instrument company Gretsch was already using Broadcaster for some of their drums and banjos, so Fender had to stop using it. And again, sticking with that TV theme, they came up with Telecast, Telecaster. When they're brainstorming names for their next model, the Space Racer was the big thing. Going up into the stratosphere, the Stratocaster. And here's one more for you. The precision bass, unlike its predecessor, the upright bass had frets, making it more accurate for tuning, making it more precise, precision bass. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. You are now that much wiser about your guitar. And remember, there's weekly lessons over at the Samurai Guitar Dojo. It's a growing community. Cool things are happening over there. It's a direct path to improvement on your instrument. And I'd love to see you over there. If you want to get involved, hit the link in the description and you're going to get in for 50% off. Until next time, thank you all for watching. Look after yourselves, look after each other, look after the planet. I'm Samurai Guitarist, and I'll see you again soon.